thought this fit the mood as I read it. It's actually from a poet, A.E. Hausman, but I got it from a lecture I was watching by Stephen Heller, who was speaking on the Red Book at Chapman University, and you might remember it if you've seen it. Out of a timeless world, shadows fall upon time. From a beauty older than earth, a ladder the soul may climb. I climb by a phantom stair to a whiteness older than time. That's the mood that the book gave me as I read it. As my ego relativized itself, whoops, I want to go backwards. Relativized itself to meet the numinous, holy, kind of really spiritual quality that the book gave, I thought, this man is an avatar. I'm not making him a hero, which is very patriarchal, kind of king, monotheistic God, ego thing, but an avatar. And the avatar principle is that the avatar will come in any form he or she needs to heal the world when it's really in trouble. It's also the way Kuan Yin works, the goddess of compassion. She'll take any form necessary to bring compassion into the world. It's from the Bhagavad Gita where Arjuna is talking to Krishna, and Krishna says, whenever there is a decline of righteousness and unrighteousness is in the ascendant, then I put myself forth for the protection of the virtuous, for the destruction of evildoers, and for the establishment of dharmas, or righteousness. On a firm footing, I am born from age to age. And I don't think it's an exaggeration to think of Jung as one of those, because what he did was really a huge move toward the breakup of the matrix of patriarchal enlightenment scientific thinking. When I was a second wave feminist, I thought that it should be completely wiped out, but I've modified my view since then and realized that what it needs is to be modified. Jung struggled. I mean, if you read the book, the man struggled because he knew that what he called the feminine, which excuse the essentialist kind of bias, the feminine is this, the masculine is that, but that's the way he thought of it then, and that's the way that I will talk about it, so I don't have to keep saying that every time I say the feminine, you'll know. He understood how imbalanced the culture was, and that he was himself. He understood the need to bring in this other earthy, grounded, instinctual, mythological, mythopoetic element back to be able to access that kind of consciousness. It's a different energy system. It's a different kind of consciousness, and to be able to access that and be in reciprocity with it. And he fought like hell to do it. The battle was incredible. It made, when I read it, it made me think that actually we've come some way since then, because even though it's still hugely out of balance and a huge problem for us, it didn't, to him, this earthy quality was despicable, was disgusting. And I'm not sure we see it that way. And maybe I live in an environment where people don't see it so much that way, and it's still as prevalent as it was, but it seems to have moved, which kind of gave me some hope for us. Jung created his psychological theory. I don't know how much you all know about the Red Book, how much, whether you attended the last 2 lectures or whatever, but so there's some parts that will seem like you'll need to fill it in, and some maybe repeats for you, but it's a mixed crowd. So he created his theory really out of this creative experience, out of the matrix of this creative experience that he had. And so his theory came from his direct experience. It isn't from an idea, it's from experience that he had. And then he added to it his scientific thinking, his ideas, his theory, and developed, which part was personal, which part that, would be true, for a collective group. So he was his own personal experiment. And then he worked with his clients, validated it and tweaked it. And you'll notice if you read the collected works or any part of them, it sounds very defensive. It sounds defensive. This is scientific. This is not mystical. It was not in vogue to be mystical at the time. I've proved this empirically over time, but it comes from his direct experience, which is unusual for scientific theory to do that. He was impelled or compelled to do this test because he was in a breakdown. And I'll go into that a little bit more later, but this, kind of as an introduction. He was in a crisis, a spiritual crisis, a mental crisis, a personal crisis. And he met it. He met that crisis in an exceptionally creative way, and an exceptional way of, I'm going to work with this. I'm going to keep my ego present, my conscious self present, and deal with this crisis. It reminds me when you study mindfulness meditation practice, or any kind of meditation practice, where you're keeping a center point while you allow the feelings or the waves of energy to wash over you. You're not really distancing yourself from them. You are keeping a center point in relationship to them. And that's what the man did. And that, not that many people can do that in an emergency like that. So, what he did, there's a book that is about this thick, and it's about 9-point font, and it's like tissue thin paper. So if you ever want to read it, you got to be one of those kinds of people. But it's by a man named Eugene Gebser, and it's called The Ever-Present Origin. And he goes through different levels of consciousness that we've had, starting with, I'm summarizing this book, in just 2 sentences, but starting with just being in the swim of things, no consciousness, early period, and then moving to what you see on a Grecian urn in artwork, or what you see in the cave paintings. It's kind of a one-dimensional. So the person drawing it is still, and the animal in it or whatever it is still pretty much part of the background, barely separate. And then the big change is to perspective, the perspective of three-dimensional, where, that, and I'm going to talk about this later, but, like Leonardo da Vinci and the eye and the perspective, where then you are gaining distance from your environment. Start separating yourself from your environment and seeing it, objectifying it, studying it, being rational about it, leaves you lonely and isolated and anxious, however, on the downside. And what I think Jung was able to do was to take that perspective, that enlightenment consciousness, and draw out mythological consciousness, because you'll see a lot of the drawings are in that mythological, from that mythological period, with very little perspective and kind of two-dimensional. He was able to go back and access that energy field and interact with it from the enlightenment field. That's very flexible.